in the vast and untamed wilderness of Montana, where the air is crisp and the mountains rise like ancient guardians of the earth. A young girl named Emma Carter discovered the rhythm of patience and the art of stillness. Her father, a retired Marine Scout sniper, believed that true mastery of a rifle was never about pulling a trigger quickly, but about reading the language of the world around you. He used to say that every mountain breeze whispered secrets, every shadow carried meaning, and every subtle change in the air could shape the path of a bullet. Emma was not like other children in her small mountain town. While her friends spent evenings chasing fireflies or daring one another to leap into the icy creeks, she followed her father into remote ridges where the silence pressed close like a second skin. Her dark hair tied neatly into braids, and her sharp brown eyes focused with unusual intensity. She would lie motionless on the rocky ground, learning to feel the weight of the earth beneath her chest, and to notice the slightest movement in the distant tree lines. Her father, Robert Carter, carried a rifle not to impress or intimidate, but to teach precision as a form of discipline. He taught Emma that shooting was never about violence. It was a blend of science and meditation. Every bullet traveled not only through air, but through mathematics, through invisible equations written across the sky. He would point to the horizon and explain how humidity could bend a trajectory, how altitude changed air density, how wind spiraled unpredictably down the slopes of mountains, and how temperature itself altered the flight of lead. At first, Emma struggled to grasp the invisible arithmetic of the world. She would pull the trigger and miss by feet, then glance at her father with frustration. He never scolded her. Instead, he would smile faintly and remind her that patience was a weapon more powerful than any firearm. Slowly, she began to understand. She kept a notebook filled with small equations, numbers scribbled beside sketches of clouds and the jagged ridgelines. They looked childish at first, but over time, those pages became a library of ballistic wisdom. By the time she was 16, Emma could lie on a ridge and strike a target 2,000 meters away with a consistency that left seasoned hunters speechless. The old men of town, who had spent decades tracking elk and bear through the wilderness, shook their heads when they saw the teenager's accuracy. They muttered that it was unnatural how steady her hands or how calm her breathing became under pressure. Emma, however, never boasted she carried a rifle the way a painter carried a brush, as if it were simply a tool meant to bring an inner vision into reality. Her father instilled in her a principle that would echo through every moment of her later life. He said, "Emma, a true marksman does not fire to prove skill, but to fulfill responsibility. Sometimes a single bullet may determine whether lives are lost or saved, and the weight of that choice is far greater than the pride of hitting a distant target." She listened to his words and let them take root deep inside her heart. Their training sessions were never just about pulling a trigger. Emma learned fieldcraft by crawling silently through thorny underbrush until her arms bled. She learned to blend into landscapes, using branches, soil, and scraps of fabric to vanish against rock and snow. She learned patience by waiting in absolute stillness for hours, sometimes entire afternoons, until her father whispered that the lesson was not in firing, but in resisting the urge to fire too. Soon she discovered that discipline meant being as much a part of the forest as the trees and stones themselves. Her education stretched beyond bullets and barrels. Robert Carter was determined that his daughter's mind would be as sharp as her eyes. He made her study meteorology so she could read weather like scripture. He brought home heavy university textbooks on physics and insisted she calculate bullet arcs not on paper, but in her head. He wanted her to see that mathematics and science were not abstract, but living forces around her. Each gust of wind, each drop of rain, each rising column of heat from the valley floor carried its own equation, and Emma would learn to solve them instinctively. By the time Emma reached her 18th birthday, she had become something of a legend in the quiet corners of Montana. Stories spread among hunters and competitive shooters about the girl who could hit a coin at impossible distances using nothing but her father's aging rifle and her uncanny ability to measure the unseen. She considered studying aerospace engineering because her fascination with trajectories and flight extended naturally toward rockets and aircraft, but deep inside, she felt the Call of service, the same call her father once answered. She wanted to test her abilities, not just on paper or in the mountains, but in real missions where lives truly depended on the shot. When Emma enlisted in the Army, her scores on marksmanship tests shattered expectations. Her instructors watched as she struck distant targets with precision that seemed almost unreal. They whispered among themselves, unsure if she was simply lucky or if she possessed something beyond natural talent. She broke training records one after another, not because she sought recognition, but because every challenge felt like another equation to solve. Yet even in those early days, she sensed the quiet resistance from many around her. The military was still heavy with traditions built by men, and many did not believe a young woman could carry the weight of psychological pressure that came with being a sniper. They believed snipers required aggression and ruthlessness, while Emma approached her craft with patience, calculation, and calm. That difference in philosophy would become both her strength and the reason she was often underestimated. Still, in those first years of training and service, Emma never let skepticism break her focus. She remembered her father's words in the mountains and carried them like armor. The true sniper does not need the world to believe in them. The true sniper only needs to believe in the shot. Thus began Emma Carter's journey from the hidden ridges of Montana to the battlefields of the world, a journey where mathematics met survival, where patience met urgency, and where the lessons of a father would one day hold back the tide of global destruction. Emma Carter stepped into the world of the military with the same calm resolve she had carried through her mountain training. Her enlistment at 18 was less a leap into the unknown and more an inevitable step forward. She had prepared her whole life for this, though she did not yet realize how far her skill would take her. At basic training, her accuracy stunned instructors. Targets at 500 meters that others struggled to hit looked to Emma like pebbles lying in the grass. When she advanced into sniper school, her reputation began to form. She was quiet, never brash, but her performance spoke louder than any words. Her instructors watched as she absorbed every lesson with relentless focus. Every equation, every environmental factor was not just theory to her, but part of a living system she had studied since childhood. Her longest confirmed shot during training reached 3,200 meters. The bullet cut across the distance with a flight time so long that others laughed at the attempt. Yet when the target fell, they realized Emma had calculated variables far beyond the standard manual. She had measured air density shifts with instinct. She had accounted for the Earth's curvature and rotation. She had made a shot that felt impossible, but to her was simply the next step in mathematics. Despite these achievements, skepticism lingered. Male officers and fellow trainees whispered that she might perform in training, but not in combat where fear and chaos cloud judgment. They argued that women could not remain steady under fire. Emma heard these doubts, but never let them distract her. In her mind, silence was the best response. She would let results speak. Her first deployment came in the Middle East. The environment was unforgiving, blinding heat by day and bone-deep chill by night. Sandstorms whipped across the plains and distorted visibility. The mission required her to provide overwatch for a team moving through hostile territory to extract a capture informant. It was a test of patience and discipline. Emma lay hidden on a rooftop of a crumbling building. Her rifle steadied on a mount fashioned from broken bricks. Hours passed while she tracked enemy patrols weaving through narrow alleys. Her calm breathing never wavered as she noted the patterns of their movement. When a moment came, her shots were clean, precise, and silent. Enemy combatants fell one by one before they could even raise alarm. The extraction team returned safely without knowing how close they had come to disaster. Reports of the mission circulated quickly. The men she protected swore they never even glimpsed where the fire came from. The official account described her as a ghost, an unseen presence who eliminated threats before they realized they were in danger. The name stuck, and soon Emma Carter was known simply as Ghost. This call sign did not just represent her invisibility on the battlefield, but also the way she carried herself. She did not demand attention nor seek to prove her worth with bravado. She let her results carve her place. Some called her too methodical, claiming she overthought every detail. But her so-called overthinking was precisely what allowed her to achieve accuracy at ranges most dared not attempt. Her approach contrasted sharply with military tradition. Doctrine emphasized aggression and speed, Emma emphasized patience and calculation. She took longer to prepare, but when she fired, the results were undeniable. Some commanders grew frustrated with her methods, but others began to realize she represented a new kind of sniper, one who merged science with instinct in ways textbooks could not teach. Over the next 5 years, Emma served in multiple theaters, Syria, Afghanistan, regions of Eastern Europe. Each deployment taught her new lessons. In cities, she learned how wind tunneled through concrete corridors, shifting bullets unpredictably. She studied how heat rising from asphalt bent sight lines, and how smog, or industrial haze, could alter air resistance. In mountains, she relearned patience, waiting days in bitter cold to strike a single target. Every mission added layers of knowledge to the foundation her father had built in Montana. Her confirmed kills rose steadily, reaching numbers that placed her among the deadliest snipers of her era. Yet Emma never glorified the count. Each shot weighed heavily on her mind. She often wrote notes in her journal not about enemies lost, but about lives saved because of precision. To her, every bullet was a question of responsibility rather than a tally of achievement. The military, however, was not so quick to embrace her philosophy. Many commanders still dismissed her abilities as anomalies. They valued tradition over innovation, believing in muscle memory more than mental calculation. Colonel Robert Hayes became the embodiment of that resistance. Hayes was decorated strong and unwavering in his belief that force and aggression won wars. He respected skill, but his worldview had been shaped by decades of operations where only men filled the critical roles. As Emma's reputation grew, so did the tension with officers like Hayes. They acknowledged her results, but rarely entrusted her with the most critical assignments. Old prejudices lingered, even as she demonstrated again and again that her methods worked. This quiet struggle between innovation and tradition shadowed her career like a second battlefield. By the end of her 5th year, Emma had become more than a skilled sniper. She had become a symbol to those who believed that science, patience, and discipline could outweigh brute force. Her presence in the ranks challenged assumptions and inspired whispers among younger recruits who saw in her proof that limits existed only in the mind. Her call sign Ghost was no longer just a nickname. It was a reputation that spread through barracks and across units. Some spoke of her with admiration, others with skepticism, but all recognized that Emma Carter was different. She represented change, the kind of change that unsettled tradition but carried within it the power to redefine what was possible. Emma herself thought little of legacy. She cared only for the next mission, the next calculation, the next equation that the battlefield presented. She knew that one day the world might demand of her not just skill, but the impossible. And in her heart, she felt prepared. Because every lesson, every calculation, every moment of silence on the mountains of her youth had been building toward a test greater than anything she had yet faced. Colonel Robert Hayes was the kind of leader who carried the weight of tradition in every word and gesture. At 42 years old, with nearly 2 decades of service in the Navy's elite special operations, he had earned his medals through raw aggression and unflinching discipline. He was built from the old-school belief that victory came from force, speed, and overwhelming firepower. To him, innovation was a distraction, and theory was a luxury that battle rarely allowed. His worldview was forged in missions where muscle and grit carried the day, and he did not easily accept ideas that challenged this foundation. When Emma Carter was assigned to operations under his command, the tension was immediate, though unspoken. Hayes respected competence, but his respect was measured by his own narrow definition. For him, toughness was physical resilience, long marches, heavy loads, nights without sleep, and relentless combat stress. Emma's calm, patient style unsettled him. She was not loud, not aggressive, and she spoke of equations and atmosphere patterns rather than the quick violence he trusted. The first time Emma presented her ballistic models to a room full of operators, Hayes listened with folded arms. She spoke of wind shear and air density shifts as though they were enemies as dangerous as armed men. She described bullets not just as projectiles, but as travelers across invisible landscapes, shaped by gravity and rotation. To her, these details were essential. To Hayes, they sounded like hesitation. He believed that under pressure, no one had the luxury of numbers and calculations. You either pulled the trigger fast or you lost. His skepticism hardened during joint planning for a mission that would soon test every assumption he held. Intelligence agencies had traced Dr. Michael Arkhov, a rogue weapons scientist, to a fortified facility in the mountains of Central Asia. Arkhov was no ordinary adversary. Once a designer in the Soviet nuclear program, he had turned his knowledge to chaos, trading secrets to extremists and building a plan that could ignite global war. Reports revealed he had stolen weapons-grade uranium and constructed a missile capable of striking a major city. His goal was not simply destruction, but deception. He intended the launch to appear as though carried out by a powerful nation, provoking automatic retaliation and setting in motion a chain of nuclear strikes that could shatter civilization. The timeline was short. Satellites tracked engineers moving around launch platforms. Intercepts confirmed the final stages of preparation. The terrain around the facility was merciless. Jagged ridges and narrow valleys wrapped the compound like walls. Sophisticated air defenses stood ready to shred aircraft. Approaching forces on the ground would be funneled into kill zones. Any conventional assault would arrive too late. By the time troops closed in, a missile would already be gone streaking across the sky, with a warhead strong enough to erase millions. The only possible answer was a single bullet. A sniper positioned far beyond detection would have to eliminate Arkhov before he could initiate the launch sequence. Yet the numbers were staggering. The required shot stretched beyond 7,000 meters, a distance at the very edge of human capability. Even veteran snipers balked at the calculation. Wind shifts alone could move a bullet by dozens of meters across such a span. A miscalculation of air pressure or temperature could send a round spinning uselessly in a rock. Hayes did not flinch at the enormity of the challenge. Instead, he turned instinctively to the snipers under his own command. Petty Officer Daniel Ruiz had been his marksman for years. Ruiz was solid, reliable, with confirmed kills across Iraq and Afghanistan. His longest shot was under 2,000 meters, but to Hayes that experience in combat meant more than any theory. In the first planning session, he announced confidently that Ruiz would take the shot. Emma sat quietly in the briefing room listening. She had already begun her own calculations from the intelligence photographs. Her notes filled with numbers, angles, and projected wind tunnels through the mountain valleys. She understood immediately that this was not a conventional shot. It demanded precision at a level most operators never trained for. She raised her voice, respectfully suggesting that her background with extreme long-range ballistics might be suited to the mission profile. Hayes dismissed her words with the same casual certainty he had shown in every meeting. He said the mission was not about breaking records, but about reliability under fire. He believed that a woman could not shoulder the psychological burden when the stakes were nuclear. He believed calculations would crumble under stress, and instinct would be the only ally. In his eyes, Emma was an anomaly in training, not a warrior in battle. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Ruiz practiced angles of fire, but could not extend his accuracy to the required range. Each attempt fell short either by distance or precision. Hayes, however, continued to believe his man could adapt. He trusted familiarity over innovation. Emma, meanwhile, positioned herself as backup overwatch. She carried no expectation that her calculations would be trusted, but she continued refining them nonetheless. For 3 days, she tracked wind currents across the valley. She observed how heat shifted patterns from midday to night. She built models that accounted for every minor fluctuation. She even considered the impact of altitude layers where air density changed between ridgelines. Her calculations grew more complex, more accurate with each hour. To her, the environment was an equation that could be solved with patience. Hayes remained locked in his doctrine. He pushed his team toward direct approaches again and again. Each attempt was met with resistance. Arkhov's defenses detected every movement. Missile launch preparations continued undisturbed. The frustration built in the colonel's voice as reports confirmed no progress. Yet he could not admit that the solution might lie with the soldier he had ignored. On the 4th day, satellite images revealed activity around the missile platform. Engineers, fueling systems, final checks beginning. Intercepts confirmed that launch protocols were imminent. The time for hesitation had vanished. Hayes and his team were pinned down by defensive fire, unable to advance. He called for air support, but command denied him. The skies above were locked by enemy anti-aircraft systems. The order came back clear. He was authorized to use any solution that prevented nuclear ignition. Hayes looked around at his men pinned low against rocks. He looked then at Emma Carter, lying far back, in Overwatch, her rifle steady, her notes filled with calculations scribbled over and over. In that moment, tradition cracked. He realized his faith in old methods had failed, and the world demanded something else. The burden of saving millions rested not on the shoulders he had trusted, but on the soldier he had dismissed. The valley lay silent, except for the distant rumble of engines and the metallic clatter of preparations within the enemy compound. Emma Carter adjusted her scope and breathed slowly. For 4 days she had been running calculations on scraps of paper and in her mind rehearsing the impossible. Now, as Colonel Hayes finally turned to her in desperation, the moment had arrived. Wind tugged at her face as she peered through the scope. It was no ordinary gust, but a shifting current weaving through the mountain passes. She had mapped it carefully, noting how each hour brought new turbulence. At 7,000 meters, even the smallest change meant disaster. She whispered numbers under her breath like a prayer: air density, altitude, temperature gradients. Her notes had become more than figures. They were lifelines. Hayes' voice cracked over the radio, carrying urgency. He asked if she could make the shot. Emma responded with calm precision that she had been preparing for this very moment. For 3 days, she had measured the valley like a living equation. She knew the wind patterns that curled behind cliffs. She knew how the thin mountain air altered bullet flight. She even factored in the subtle rotation of the Earth itself. The shot was technically possible, but the margin for error was no wider than a fingernail. The colonel's reply was grim. If she missed, the world would be plunged in a nuclear war within half an hour. The responsibility was almost unbearable, but Emma had trained her entire life for responsibility. Her father's words came back to her like echoes in the wind. A single bullet can change the course of history. She steadied her breathing until her pulse slowed to a rhythm. She felt the ground beneath her chest anchor her body, as if the mountain itself had become part of her. Through her high-powered optics, she spotted Dr. Michael Arkhov. The scientist moved between the launch control station and the missile platform. His motions were deliberate, each step carrying the weight of catastrophic intent. He barked orders at his technicians while scanning checklists. Emma followed his movements with her scope never flinching. She had to fire not at where he was, but at where he would be 8 seconds later when her bullet completed its long journey through the air. Her calculations flooded her mind. The bullet would drop over 200 feet across the distance. Wind drift could shove it sideways by dozens of meters. Atmospheric layers bent the path invisibly. All of this had to be measured and compensated. Emma's fingers adjusted the dials on her rifle scope. Each movement deliberate, each click a decision with the weight of billions of lives behind it. The radio crackled again. A voice from command announced that the launch sequence had begun. Arkhov was initiating final steps. 20 seconds remained before the process reached the point of no return. Hayes spoke again. His voice that once dismissed her now carried only urgency and hope. He told her she was authorized. The world depended on her. Emma exhaled half her breath and held the rest. Her heartbeat slowed to a steady drumbeat. She placed the crosshairs not on Arkhov himself, but at a spot in space where her mind told her he would be after the bullet's long flight. Her father had drilled this into her during endless afternoons in the Montana mountains. She heard him again in memory, reminding her that patience was strength and calculation was truth. The trigger broke with the gentlest pressure. The rifle thundered, but Emma did not flinch. Her eyes stayed on the scope as the bullet leapt into the void. 7,000 meters of air lay between her and her target. The round arced invisibly across the valley. Writing equations Emma had calculated with more care than most people gave to their own lives. For nearly 8 seconds, time seemed to stop. The world held its breath. Down in the compound, Dr. Arkhov reached for the final switch. His finger extended toward a button that would unleash nuclear fire. At that instant, the bullet arrived, a whisper of metal cutting through air and flesh. Arkhov collapsed before his hand touched the control. The launch halted in silence. The technicians froze in shock. The apocalypse had been stopped by a single unseen hand from the mountainside. Emma's voice carried calmly across the radio. target neutralized, nuclear launch prevented, she did not shout or celebrate. Her tone was steady, as if she had merely solved another equation. But the silence that followed from Hayes and the rest of the team told her they understood the magnitude. Billions of lives had been spared because of her calculation and her trigger pull. In the minutes that followed, the team moved to secure the facility. Emma remained at her perch, scanning for threats. She knew the mission was not finished until every danger had been neutralized, yet inside her chest relief pulsed with quiet intensity. She had carried the weight of the world for those few seconds, and she had not faltered. Hayes finally spoke again, his voice humble for the first time. He admitted that what she had just done was the most important shot in human history. For a man who had once claimed a woman could never make such a shot, it was the closest thing to an apology Emma would ever need. Later analysis would confirm the staggering precision. Her bullet had traveled almost 8 full seconds across air that shifted multiple times. It had dropped more than 200 feet and still struck within 2 centimeters of her intended point of impact. Experts who reviewed the data could scarcely believe it. The shot rewrote the boundaries of what was considered possible. For Emma, however, it was not about records or acclaim. It was about fulfilling responsibility. It was about remembering her father's lessons in the mountains and proving to herself that patience, calculation, and calm could triumph even when the fate of humanity rested on a millimeter. That day, Emma Carter became not just Ghost the unseen sniper, but something larger. She became the proof that imagination and discipline could extend human ability into the realm of the impossible. She became the reminder that underestimation is the greatest error any commander can make. And as the sun set over the mountains, her figure lay still against the rocks, invisible as ever, a guardian whose single bullet had saved the world. The world never truly learned the details of what happened in that remote valley. The official reports buried the story under layers of classified markings and sterile summaries. Yet within the ranks of those who knew, whispers spread like fire. Emma Carter, the soldier many had dismissed as too methodical, too quiet, and too unorthodox, had fired the single most consequential shot in human history. Colonel Robert Hayes, who once doubted her, became her strongest advocate. In every debriefing and every meeting that followed, he described her precision with awe. He admitted his mistake openly to fellow officers. He confessed that tradition had blinded him, and that it was her innovation, her discipline, and her refusal to be swayed by prejudice that had saved civilization. His voice carried weight, and with it came a slow shift in culture. For Emma, recognition arrived, not in grand speeches or ceremonies at first, but in small ways. Soldiers who had once avoided eye contact now sought her advice. Young recruits, especially women, looked at her not just as a sniper, but as proof that barriers could be broken. Her call sign, Ghost, carried new meaning. No longer just the name of an unseen presence on the battlefield, it became a symbol of quiet strength, of the invisible power of patience and intellect. Months later, the acknowledgement became official. Emma was promoted to Master Sergeant and awarded the nation's highest honor. The medal placed around her neck was heavy, but not heavier than the weight she had carried in those 8 seconds of silence. Reporters tried to capture her story, but she gave little away. She spoke not of her own skill, but of responsibility. She repeated that it was never about records, but about lives saved. Her humility baffled those who expected triumphalism. Yet for Emma, the victory was not hers alone. It belonged to her father's teachings, to the discipline of every lesson carved into her by wind and mountain silence. Behind the scenes, ballistic experts pored over the data from her shot. They studied her calculations, her methodology, her ability to integrate atmospheric physics and human instinct. They declared that she had achieved something beyond doctrine, something that expanded the future of sniper operations. Her approach became a new field of study. Military academies began adapting her methods, teaching recruits that patience, mathematics, and environmental awareness could push the boundaries of possibility. Emma herself was placed at the helm of an advanced long-range shooting program. She trained young soldiers not only to fire but to think. She drilled them in equations, but also in silence. She taught them that a true marksman must master not only the weapon but also themselves. She made them lie for hours in the dirt listening to the wind. She asked them to write calculations until they could do them without paper. She turned science into instinct and instinct into science. Under her guidance, a new generation rose, carrying her philosophy forward. Her influence stretched beyond the military. In civilian lectures and seminars, she was occasionally invited to speak. She never shared classified details, but she spoke of underestimation of the way society limits individuals with assumptions. She told audiences that the most dangerous belief anyone can hold is that another person is incapable based on tradition or appearance. She reminded them that she was once dismissed as too slow, too methodical, too female to make the critical shot, and yet, when the world needed her, it was those very qualities that made success possible. Emma's legacy was not only carved in the silence of that one bullet, but in the ripples it created. Commanders who once doubted unconventional approaches began to reconsider. Doors that had been closed for women in combat roles creaked open a little wider. Innovation in tactics received more respect. Patience gained a new reputation as strength rather than weakness. For Emma, however, the world's noise mattered little. At night, she still dreamed of the Montana ridges where her journey began. She remembered lying beside her father watching clouds drift over peaks and learning that every breath of wind was a teacher. She remembered the first time she solved an equation in her head and realized that numbers in nature spoke the same language. Those memories remained her compass far more than medals or ranks. Years after the impossible shot, Emma often returned to those same mountains during leave. She carried no rifle, then only a notebook. She would sit quietly sketching ridgelines and marking wind patterns as if the world were still her classroom. Hunters who spotted her recognized her face and whispered, but she never sought their attention. She belonged not to fame but to silence. The lesson of her life was clear. Sometimes the most underestimated person carries within them the strength to alter history. Sometimes the qualities mocked or dismissed by others become the very keys to survival. Emma Carter proved that strength is not always measured in aggression or noise, but in patience, discipline, and imagination. The valley where she stopped nuclear war remains nameless on maps. The world passes it by unaware of what almost happened there. But in the quiet archives of the military, her shot is preserved as a case study, a moment when science, instinct, and courage merged. The report calls it simply the 7,000-meter solution. Emma calls it nothing at all. To her, it was just the next problem to solve, the next responsibility to shoulder. Her story continues not in grand tales, but in the students she teaches, in the commanders she inspires to think differently, in the quiet resilience of those who refuse to be defined by prejudice. She is still ghost silent, unseen, yet shaping the future. And perhaps that is fitting, for the greatest legacies are not shouted from podiums, but carved into silence, carried forward by those who learn that the boundaries of what is possible are not written in stone, but in imagination. Emma Carter did not just fire the longest shot ever attempted. She showed the world that the most dangerous limitations are not those of physics, but of belief. And with that truth, she left behind a legacy not of war, but of possibility.